Welcome to the Choral Connection, a series of interviews with musicians with whom Maestro Harold Rosenbaum has collaborated over his 47-year international conducting career. We hope you are inspired by their artistry and the stories they have to tell. For more about the series, please visit www.haroldrosenbaum.com.
Hi, my guest today is Ellen Taafe Zwilich, and she began her studies as a violinist, earning a Bachelor of Music from Florida State University in 1960. She moved to New York City to play with the American Symphony Orchestra under Leonard Stokowski. She later enrolled at Juilliard, eventually becoming the first woman to earn the degree of Doctor of Musical Arts in Composition. Her teachers included John Bodak, Elliott Carter, and Roger Sessions. She first came to prominence when Pierre Boulez programmed her Symposium for Orchestra with the Juilliard Symphony Orchestra in 1975. Her Symphony No. 1 won the 1983 Pulitzer Prize, after which point her popularity and income from commissions ensured that she could devote herself to composing full-time. From 1995 to 1999, she was the first occupant of the composer's chair at Carnegie Hall. While there, she created the Making Music concert series, which focuses on performances and lectures by living composers, a series which still is in existence. She has received many prestigious honors and awards over the years, including an Academy Award from the American Academy of Arts and Letters, a Guggenheim Foundation Fellowship, and 4 Grammy nominations. She was elected to the American Academy of Arts and Letters and the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. And in 1999, she was designated Musical America's Composer of the Year. She has been professor at Florida State University and has served for many years on the advisory panel of the BMI Foundation. In 2009, she became the chair of the BMI Student Composer Awards, following Milton Babbitt and William Schumann. She has received 6 honorary doctorates. You can read more about her online, obviously. Welcome.
If you want to.
And further along in this discussion, I'll tell people how our paths have crossed. You started out as a violinist and played with the American Symphony Orchestra under Leopold Stokowski, who founded the orchestra. How was that experience? I read that he spurned the baton and conducted with his hands. Was that a weird thing to see an orchestra conductor do back then?
Not really, but I have to say, I was a violinist, but I was a composer since I was 10 years old. And I had music played by my high school band, and I wrote stuff that got paid when I was in college. And I mean, I was always a composer. Stokowski founded the American Symphony a couple of years before I got to New York. And when I got there, this was probably the only open door to females and Black people and Asians in the symphonic world. So, I mean, I've been kind of lucky to have been at the right place at the right time. Those years with Stokey were wonderful. I hate to tell you this, Harold, but in the 7 years there, we not only had Stokowski, but major conductors came in from Europe, Paul Kletsky, Ernst Ansermet, Eugen Joachim, Karl Böhm, all of whom brought a different sort of, thing to the experience. And we even had full concerts of composers' music with the composers conducting. And that ranged from Luciano Berio to Aram Khachaturian. I mean, it was a really wonderful, wonderful experience for me. But the thing I didn't want to tell you is that when I got in the American Symphony, before all of this experience, I thought I knew what a conductor did. By the end of those 7 years, I would say, I have no idea what the conductor does, because there are conductors like Karl Böhm, let's say, who had absolutely horrible stick technique. And his idea of rehearsing was, complaining that he needs to go back to Vienna where they know how to play. But I remember doing a Schubert symphony with him that was just unbelievably wonderful. I thought he did a fantastic Salome at the Met. In other words, it's very, very hard to say. And I think Stokowski's gestures and the open hand thing, they were very welcoming. As a conductor, it was like inviting you to play, kind of thing.
So when one can't really follow a conductor very well, do the players rely on the concert master or the concert mistress to look at?
No, I have a different opinion about it. I think that if you have a total love and understanding of a piece of music, that can kind of go over the podium to the orchestra. And I don't think it's a question of assigning somebody else to give the downbeat. It's a question, there's an element of mystery in it, in my opinion. After many years of experience, there's this kind of mysterious element. And what the conductor brings to the table is as important as, I mean, there are people that have absolutely wonderful stick technique and nothing happens musically. And people with certain issues about that, where they can get a performance out of you. There's an element of mystery, if you don't mind my saying.
Leonard Bernstein himself said he didn't have great stick technique, but he was magical to work with.
Oh, he did. Yes, he really did. He had more than stick technique. He had, the body was in there. And I mean, he would have said that, but.
I understand. Do you think conductors who might realize they don't have great physical technique understand what's going on, in terms of how it all comes together, even though they think that the orchestra might not be watching him or her, or because do you think he understands what's actually happening? In other words, does he know his technique is not good enough to pull together the orchestra, but somehow it comes together? And does he realize what's going on, that people are looking, as you say, past the podium?
I really don't know that. I mean, it would depend on the conductor and what they were trying to do. Mm-hmm. And, it's, like I say, I think there's a bit of an element of mystery. And when it gets very practical, like, okay, we'll follow the concert master and bada. That usually is not really a good thing for the performance. The performance has to have, life in it. It can't just be like, okay, we're going to play this note correct. As a composer, for instance, I remember having a performance of a very difficult piece of mine, and I won't name the instrument that it was for. And the person who did the first performance missed a single note and came to me and apologized. And what I didn't say was, pardon me, but I tuned out after the first phrase because it was so robotic. So I don't care if there's a missed note. I care if you missed the intent, and the temporal element of the music. If that's not there, if that is there, I don't care. I mean, one of my favorite pianists of all time was Arthur Rubenstein. Arthur Rubenstein would miss notes, and who cared? It's like he was not the robot playing the piano. He was a person bringing the piano and the music to life, so.
Also true of Vladimir Horowitz, that in his later years, he would miss notes, but who cared?
Yeah. Well, but he had certain issues, of not wanting to face the public,
Oh yeah, that's right. That's right. Like Glenn Gould.
Yeah. See, it's very complicated. It isn't like somebody's just going to be a musician and they do this and they do that. It's complicated. Whether it's a conductor or, a pianist, it's like.
I did read that Stokowski, what is the right pronunciation? Stokowski of his name?
Well, we used to call him Stokey.
Okay, I'll call him Stokey.
And to his name, we called him Maestro. To his face, we called him Maestro. But we all called him Stokey.
And I did hear that he was really upset that there weren't minorities and women and African Americans in the orchestra, and he So he worked hard to change that right away? I mean,
I have no idea. I wasn't there at the outset. I just know the door was open.
good.
Unlike the rest of the musical world, you know, at that time, the orchestras, the major orchestras were like 99 point some other percent white European males. And he just opened the door.
Do you know that, and this is true, I found this out, that Stokey's third wife was Gloria Vanderbilt, Anderson Cooper's mother?
Yeah, yeah. That was while I was working for him, as a matter of fact.
Wow.
And he was quite a character. I would not say he was a nice guy, but he was quite a character. And he was extremely demanding and very hard on musicians in a way, you know.
The old school.
Yeah, I think so, probably.
Most conductors are not like that anymore.
Yeah.
I mean, take Bob Spano, for example. He's the exact opposite.
Yeah.
Endearing. He gets what he wants, but he's so nice and endearing.
That's right. Well, yeah, Stokey didn't even want to call your name. He always had a little list. We used to call it his Viva Zapata list of the orchestra because he could knock you out at any time. But he would say, boy with a striped shirt, girl with the red blouse. He didn't want to act like he knew your name, that you were that important, that he, you know, it was very, very, you know, old, as you say, old school.
Yeah. Now, when you applied to the doctoral composition department at Juilliard, did you receive the usual discouragement and discrimination inflicted upon women in those days?
As I said before, I seem to have been at the right place at the right time. I went to a public high school in Florida that had a fabulous music program, and they had behind the screen auditions. And the reason they did, when you got in, let's say you were in the 10th grade or 9th grade, whatever, I played the trumpet also. You got the last seat in the section, but you could challenge your way up 3 people ahead of you or something like that. And you would issue a challenge and then they'd have to play off with you. And this was done behind the screen. When I was a senior, for instance, the first trombone was a girl. The first clarinet was a girl. I was the concert master of the orchestra. They called me concert mistress. And I got to be one of the first trumpets in the band. And that was behind the screen auditions years before they did it in the symphonies. So, I mean, in other words, what I'm saying is that, so for instance, when I got to New York, it was just not too long after Stokowski started this orchestra, which welcomed women. And I have a famous experience from my undergraduate year, when I went to Florida State, which is a wonderful, wonderful music school, still is. All I knew was to be in music education. And after I'd been there a fairly short while, I realized I needed to be in composition. And so I went to the head of the department and he gave me a bunch of little tests and had me do this and that. And so he accepted me as a composition student. And so I changed my major. And one of my theory teachers actually sat me down and he said, you know, look, you're a girl and you like boys and they like you. You're going to get married. You need something to fall back on. It's not a good idea to go into theory and composition, is what they called it at that time. Anyway, and then the next day, another one of my theory teachers called me into his office and he said, I hear you're changing your major. And I said, yes. And I'm waiting, you know, what's he going to say? He said, well, that's great. You'll do very well. Don't take this course. It's too easy. Take this one. It's more challenging. I mean, he just got on my team. So I had a choice. I went with him.
Well, it's like today. I think most people wanting to become lawyers are women.
Yeah.
And certainly, you know, there are probably just as many women composers now as men composers.
Oh, yeah. And when Ruth Bader Ginsburg went to Harvard, I think she was one of 5 law students that were female.
Right.
And And they were even criticized for taking a position away from a male who would, would have it otherwise, And the world has changed, and in some ways, music has been ahead of the whole thing. I don't know why, but maybe it's because what we do is so meaningful to us. It's like.
I want to ask you about studies at Juilliard with Roger Sessions, whose early works are more or less neoclassical in style, but who later employed serialism and Viennese 12-tone technique. And then you studied there with Elliott Carter, who combined elements of European modernism and American ultramodernism into a distinctive style with a personal harmonic and rhythmic language after an early neoclassical phase. Before that, you studied with John, is it Buddha?
Buddha, yeah.
Buddha. That would have been nice to study with Buddha too, but.
Well, I've done a little of that. And I had a very nice relationship with Ernst von Dohnanyi when I was at Florida State.
I didn't know he was there.
Yes. He not composition, but I played. He taught conducting, and he was a very good conductor, by the way, a wonderful pianist and marvelous composer. But people did not go there to study composition with him because he was like the Brahms era in the public opinion at that point. But he taught conducting, and he had every week they assembled a little orchestra, just would come in and play the stuff with the conductors that were studying with him. And that's how I got to know him. And in the last 3.5 years of his life, we got fairly close. He was like a mentor. If he thought you had something, he kind of take you under his wing. And John Bona was also very nice. But I never wanted to write like anybody. I wanted to find my own voice. And that happened with me with Roger Sessions. And Sessions was a very quiet person in the lessons. My first lesson, I was working on an orchestra piece, and I always work on full score. I don't write at the piano and then orchestrate. I always work on full score. So I had this full score paper, and I'd done it maybe, I don't know how much of the new piece. And he spent the whole first lesson saying nothing but, is this E-flat clarinet or B-flat clarinet? Is this piano or harp? It was like, I thought, oh my God, he just doesn't like my music or something. And the second lesson started the same way. And he went back to the beginning of that score and went through it. And then he kind of backed off and said, well, I think I know what you're doing, what you're getting at. And he was very reticent to weigh in, never, ever tell you what to do. And somehow or other, he was an enabler of me. I don't know how it happened exactly. People say to me, what did you get from Sessions? And I can't tell you, except that I became the composer I wanted to be. You can't think of a more wonderful accolade for a teacher. But he was very restrained, very restrained.
I guess he was like the opposite of how Hindemith taught at Yale, where I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, he wanted to teach his style of writing to all his students and didn't accept their own voice.
He had, well, I could talk about that for quite a bit, because in his later life, Leon Kirshner and I got to be very, very good friends. And we spent hours talking about music and what we felt about it and who we studied with and all of these things. And yeah, he had studied with Hindemith, but I think a lot of the people who studied with him didn't quite agree on all of his ideas, particularly the one where if you don't have a lightning strike, and I think stroke is what they called it, of the entire piece before you start, that you can't be a composer. I have almost the opposite point of view, because I think a lot about the entire piece when I'm working on it. But once you get started, if the piece wants to go somewhere else, I go with the piece. I throw away the plan. And what we do is temporal, and it's affected by what came before and what's coming next and all of that. So it's interesting.
That sounds to me like John Harbison, the way he composes. He says that if he just comes up with an idea, he goes from it. In the olden days, he used to think of the whole structure first, but now he's has a different way of approaching it, where it just flows from. If he comes up with just one good idea, he knows the rest will just happen.
I agree with John, and I always say I think you got to find DNA in a piece, and I always use the example of the acorn. Now, who would look at this little acorn and say, "Oh, this is going to be a giant oak tree"? But all of the information necessary to make a giant oak tree is in that little acorn,
Right.
and it's a magical sort of thing, and that's sort of what I search for, and John and I would be in agreement about that.
You mentioned you compose, you orchestrate as you compose. You don't compose for the on the piano and then orchestrate. It just reminds me of Elliott Carter when he was 103. He said, "I can't write for piccolos anymore because he can't reach up that high to write the piccolo part."
I loved Elliott, yeah. I loved Elliott and Roger, and I never wanted to write like either one of them, but I just was so happy to have their association and the thoughts they had along the way and all of that. It was wonderful. And Elliott, good Lord, he did okay to the very end, basically. Last few months were pretty bad, but he he did very well.
I did a performance with my professional choir, the New York Virtuoso Singers, of all his chamber choral music in one concert. Between 1938 and 1954. It was all tonal.
Oh yes, it was.
Came to the concert in a church in Manhattan, St. Ignatius Episcopal Church, when he was a few weeks short of 100. And he just smiled as he walked in. He says, "Oh, I've never been to this church before." He was so delightful.
Yeah, he was. I said I never wanted to write like anybody. I never put somebody up on a pedestal and said, but I tell you the truth. There was a day when I put Elliott on that pedestal. I said, I want to be like that. And it was an event at the French consulate in New York. He'd gotten some kind of an award, and there was a picture with me and him, and he was in a wheelchair. He was like 100 in the neighborhood. He was in a wheelchair, but he had a glass of good French champagne in his right hand. That's my goal in life. I'd like to be 100 and have a glass of a good French champagne in my hand.
And he spoke perfect French.
Oh yeah, he gave his acceptance speech in French, and he knew everybody. He'd invited us, but he knew everybody that was there, and all. It was remarkable, man, remarkable.
Yeah, I have this image that I'll never forget when I went to a concert at the Guggenheim, and I saw Milton Babbitt standing there, and then the elevator opens, and out comes Elliott when he was still walking, and they just looked at each other and embraced. Oh, yeah. Beautiful.
Yeah. Well, Milton was a sweetheart too, and very funny.
Oh, I know.
I did one of those making music concerts with him, and a writer came up to me afterward and said, had no idea how humorous Milton Babbitt was, because he was always represented as this, Columbia Princeton, follow every note with a number, or follow every number with a note. But he was funny.
But here's a funny story about Milton. He handed me a mass that he wrote. It was called Music for the Mass. He wrote it in the late 30s.
Yeah.
And this was when I was working with Schirmer's. I had my own series with G. Schirmer. And he said, "My boy, could you get this published?" I said, "What?" I mean, the Kyrie was stapled together. The Gloria was stapled separately. So eventually we got it published, but it took a few years. I don't know why, but it took a few years. But I got home and I couldn't find the credo, and I was panicking. Was this his only copy? I didn't know at the time. It wasn't, but I thought maybe it was. So I called him up and I said, Milton, it's Harold. I can't find the credo. He goes, my boy, I don't believe in credos. I didn't write one.
Oh, that is Elliot, yeah.
So it was really, and copies were sent to him on his 94th birthday.
Oh, wow.
It's the Kyrie Gloria Sanctus and Agnus Dei. And it's a great piece, and it's tonal, very chromatic.
Yeah.
I just wanted to ask you, has your style of writing changed over the years, or was it set at an early age?
I think I've gotten freer over the years, and I lost my first husband very suddenly when I was working on my chamber symphony, and I couldn't do anything for a while. And when I got back to it, I was such a different person. I had to just really start over. And I remember saying to a colleague of mine, this has got to be a memorial. And he said, no, it's too soon. Just get to the double bar and give it away, forget about it. Just make your way to the double bar, the last double bar. And so I finished that piece. And when I was there for the first performance, and one of my very close friends who'd been with me this whole time turned to me at the very end of the piece, and she said, I hear acceptance in your music, and I haven't heard a word out of you that accepted any of this. She said, what am I hearing? And she was right. And that kind of made me realize that my music was ahead of me in a way, so to speak. And all of the things about the soul of the human being, and love and grief, and all of these things are in music.
Right.
And I just got much more relaxed and open and free, and not feeling any need to inhibit any impulse that I have. I sometimes go towards jazz. I did when I was, in college. I also played jazz trumpet, bebop, and big band and stuff. It's things that touch me, in some other way, and I think the thing that happened to me is that I realized I should step back and stop thinking of myself as a composer, and being required to do this or that, or not do this or not do that. And it's just, for me, it's a exploration. It's a voyage, and it's a lifetime thing. I mean, my favorite line is, I say, at my age, I still feel like I'm at the starting gate.
Speaking of loss, finally, let me just bring this up that, as you know, of course, I commissioned you to write a piece to celebrate the 25th anniversary of my New York Virtuoso Singers. I commissioned you maybe 8 or 9 years ago.
Yeah.
You chose a piece called Memorial, which was based on the Sandy Hook massacre.
Yeah.
I don't think I had any sway in what text you used. I think you just obviously.
Well, the thing that amazed me about that, I used some quasi-religious text, from a requiem, just the words. But the children's chorus, and this was a cappella, the children's chorus, the text that they had were all of the names of the victims. Right. And I was so impressed that these kids sang this, not only from memory. They didn't have the scores in their hands, but they remembered not just the music, but all of these names. Is very, very difficult. And that was that was an experience of mourning for me,
Right. It's also quite a stirring piece. It's on YouTube. If anybody wants to just type in, Zwillich, I'm sorry.
That's right.
Memorial.
Memorial.
those two words, it'll come.
Yeah.
And it was a beautiful piece besides. And the thing is that these children in my youth choir, which met in my house once, only once a week, live within half an hour from the tragedy. And before my wife and I consented to, well, before we decided to program the piece, we had every intention of doing it. We wanted to make sure that both the parents, all the parents and all the children consented.
I remember that. I thought I was very moved by that.
It was unanimous. They all wanted to honor the children.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Well, and they just, put their hearts into it, which was wonderful. Yeah. Wonderful. I mean, the grown-up chorus also, but I was just so impressed with the children doing that from memory. Wow.
Well, before we go, is there any advice you have for young composers that you want to give here?
Well, what I said before, life is not a GPS. It's not that I'm going to be a composer, so I go 2 miles up and make a right, and then I go, on and on. No, it's this detour and that detour and this change and that change. And I think if you want to be a composer, you have to be kind of a sponge, and pick up stuff from all around you and be open. And that's my view of it. And just go, and don't expect to be, a Mozart. Mozart grew up in an incredibly musical family. And, when I was learning how to tie my shoes, he was writing wonderful pieces. But if you look at Mozart's life, as short as it was, there's a blossoming as a composer that's amazing. And I think what I don't know, I don't like to tell composers anything because I don't believe you can teach composition. I agree with Bartok on that. But you just want to have a voyage. You want to explore. You want to go this way and that way, and you'll see what happens. And you can't do things based on what the common opinion is at the day of that day, and things come and go. You mentioned both Roger and Elliot having written very tonal things early on, and then they became representative of something else. It's not a GPS. It's not a straight line in any way, and something that's popular at this moment will be very, very old-fashioned, soon. And I sometimes say to some young composer, says, "You're not going to believe this, but there's going to come a day when somebody says, 'Oh, that's so 2020,' You got to find your voice and take that exploration voyage with it."
Before I say goodbye, let me just tell you that I had the great pleasure in high school of performing a choral piece that Roger Sessions wrote.
Oh, really?
Went to a summer music camp in Lawrenceville, New Jersey, and he wrote a piece. It was a mass in English, unison voices. Yeah. And Clyde Tipton was the conductor in this workshop, and he had us doing that, and I loved it. So I thought you might want to know that since you studied with him.
Yeah, it's nice to hear. It really is, really.
It was really a great pleasure for me to see you and talk to you. And
yeah, me too. I wish we were in person, but this is close.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
And I wish you and the family well.
Thank you. You too. Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.